What is up? Still becoming. Welcome back to another week, another episode. I think this is episode 32 now. So happy you can join me today. This one's a little tough, but before that, before we get into the episode, I just want to say happy 4th of July. Happy 250 years. My goodness, that's a long time. I'm not going to get into any of the you know, this, that, just happy 4th of July. And I hope you're enjoying time with your family and friends and getting to show off some fireworks. This episode will drop tomorrow after all the festivities have gone through. And so I hope it was good for you. The title of today, it kind of has to play on with a half marathon I ran 4th of July morning. And, it was titled The Day I Couldn't Go Any Faster. The theme, sometimes your body tells a story that your emotions like just can't understand. I want to tell you about, one of the most frustrating runs I've had in a long time. Nothing hurt. Nothing was really going on. I actually felt pretty good this morning. And, I didn't get much sleep. I had about 5 hours, but I've run well on 5 hours, even for a half. Really just kind of laid in bed for a long time. And so it was just one of those things. Like I feel good. Like I'm not thinking of anything different about it. I feel like this is going to be a good day. And, as the race went off, the first mile, it was smooth. It was comfortable. It was relaxed. I was just doing what my coach said. We're going to start a bit slower. And then you can drop it from there. And so, then I tried, first mile got through, hit about 5:50. And then I tried to speed up and, nothing happened. I was like, let's go. And it just wasn't there. I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't gasping for air. I couldn't go. Every time I looked at my watch and the first couple of miles, I kept saying the same thing, 5:47, 5:48, 5:45, 5:50. I was like, come on, man, where's my body? And then it was like 5:55. And eventually those 5:50s became 6 minutes and 6:30s. And I remember thinking, what's happening to me? You know, this is where our brains, immediately, become terrible coaches. That panic sets in. You immediately, start trying to solve a mystery. I was solving that mystery after the race. My brain was trying to get me to buy into that. I'm getting old. Did I lose my speed? I've wasted months. Maybe I was never actually that good. That hit hard. It just feels like I don't know, and I think those are days that, it's tough to kind of explain. I've had such a great buildup and it just didn't produce a good result. It's amazing how our minds can build an entire future from one workout, one race. One event suddenly becomes proof of everything we've feared. And, you know, none of it actually is true because our emotions don't collect evidence. They collect moments. I talked to my coach afterward, was texting back with him, and, I wasn't expecting, to care about the pace. He's not really interested in that, instead, he hardly cared. He wasn't interested in what I couldn't do. He was interested in the pattern my body was displaying, and that sentence kind of stopped me. It really shrinks down, that result that was there today. And it was a 120. I don't know if I explained that. I know, 120, that's still pretty quick at 40, but last year I went 115 there. And to these blocks I was building up, I was hitting some 80s. And feeling great, having some really solid effort workouts, but, neither here nor there. I don't really like going too much into those time splits and results. But, as he wasn't interested in the time, and it was great. It was great to hear that perspective, because I was looking at one page. You know, he was looking at an entire book. That's what experience does. Experienced people don't panic over chapters. They read the whole story. I don't think I think this is true outside of running too. We live so close to our own lives that every bad day feels permanent. One bad workout, one bad conversation, one bad week at work, one poor night of sleep, and suddenly we believe we're becoming someone else, someone terrible, someone that doesn't have what they used to. But we're not. We're not. We're just standing too close to the paint. When you're 2 inches from the paint, all you see is the brushstrokes. When you step back, suddenly it's a masterpiece. Consistency requires stepping back. The pattern only exists if you zoom out. I started thinking about something over the last year. I've become a better runner, and, not because every workout proved it. Actually, many workouts didn't. Some felt terrible. Some felt so good. Most were just normal, just another day out there, another day hitting, you know, X number of, pace miles and just feeling really good. And, when I stack them enough together, enough of those normal days together, something extraordinary begins to happen. The pattern starts telling the truth. Not today's feeling, not today's pace, not today's race. The pattern. You know, that's one of the reasons I love running so much. It teaches you to trust things you can't see immediately. You plant a seed today, long long before anything grows. You know, um, So in closing, you know, maybe you're in a season where nothing feels like it's wrong. Maybe you've been putting in the effort and you're wondering where it's all going. I'd encourage you, don't judge your life from one workout. Don't judge your marriage from one argument. Don't judge your parenting from one difficult day. And don't judge your career from one setback. Patterns matter more than moments. Moments are loud. Patterns are quiet. But patterns are usually telling the truth. This week reminded me that becoming the person you want to be isn't about proving yourself every day. It's about showing up long enough that the pattern begins to reveal who you've become. I keep building the pattern. The results, they'll eventually introduce themselves. I want to thank you for tuning in today. And remember, you are still becoming, and you are the only one stopping you. I'll see you all next week.